Hello and welcome to Sofa SENSEIS. You're joined by me, Kieron, and this is, of course, the akhi&saltfish Digital Network. You can see I'm joined by a guest. His name is Alex Le Gue, and he is the head of community development at Matchroom Boxing. What is that, you ask? Well, I'm going to ask the same question, and we're going to get straight in to both his career working in a gym, but also his career in putting together communities that benefit from the sport of boxing. So, without further ado, let's go. So, Alex, thanks so much for joining me. As always with boxers, or people affiliated with boxing, it's so easy to just book an episode. You know, this is the sport that people want to talk about, they want to get stuck into, so thanks for your time. And let's get straight into your history, I suppose. Boxing, when did it start entering your life?
Oh, mate, I've always loved boxing. So I came from, in terms of actually playing sport, came from like more of a rugby background, being from Northampton. So went to NSB. Like you naturally you're going to end up playing rugby going there. But I've always followed the sport. Always loved boxing. Always stayed up for the big fights. You know, when I was younger. But I guess when I first actually got involved in the sport was probably about 2014, 2015, when I worked at Northamptonshire Sport. So I used to be the national governing body lead for Northamptonshire Sport. So basically working with 16 different NGBs. So I worked with bowls clubs, golf clubs, rugby, tennis, all these different sports, and boxing was one of them. And that's when I first came across James Conway, who at the time was involved with King's Heath Boxing Club. It was James, it was Arthur Daly. Obviously met Kieron Conway down there, and that's where the boxing journey kind of began, I guess.
So when we talk then about, your schooling time, playing rugby, when was that transition period sort of evident for you that actually I'm going to move over to boxing? It came about through work. It was more luck than anything. I'd always wanted to kind of get involved in the sport, but as I say, my background playing was very much that rugby. I was always like, I was pretty decent when I was younger, and I was kind of following that as far as I possibly could. When it came around with my job at Northamptonshire Sport, it was kind of like James got in touch with me actually via LinkedIn and said, I think it's probably a little bit of help we can do with like funding wise, this, that, the other. So I went down the gym. In fact, I remember I went down there and I turned up in all like, I was wearing RFU rugby stash, shorts, all this kind of thing, typical like rugby boy. And I remember he thought to me, him and Arthur both said, like, this guy, who is this guy rocking up in the shorts? Like, don't quite know what to think of him. So anyway, they invited me down to train to begin with as well, because I was interested in getting involved in the sport in that sense. So I did that, and I guess just got more and more involved, mainly sort of like just going down a bit, keep fit stuff, all that, and then roll on a couple of months. They invited me down to hand out some trophies at the show, at one of their club shows over in Northamptonshire. So I did that, and then it just sort of one thing led to another, and just got more and more involved in the sport, really. So you worked on sort of funding body. Mm-hmm. Could you paint a picture for Sofa SENSEIS of what the funding picture is like for amateur gyms? We could even localize it. We could talk about Northampton, but more generally across the country. What's the financial picture look like? So
if you've got your governance structures properly, properly sorted behind the scenes, then I'd say you're okay if you're a boxing club. There's plenty of funds you can access. At the minute, the government are really, really interested in marginalised communities, and obviously boxing clubs sit within those largely. So 40% of boxing clubs nationally sit within the top 20% on the indices of multiple deprivation. So basically what that means is that boxing clubs are in the heart of the most deprived communities nationally. So because of that, a lot of funds at the moment are being directed towards those communities. Boxing clubs in that sense are in a good position. However, to access the funds, you've got to be set up properly behind the scenes. You've probably got to have enough volunteers as well to be able to actually write the bids and understand how to properly spend the money and everything. So I'd say in one sense they're very fortunate and in a good position, but you've got to have everything sorted behind the scenes to be able to actually properly access the funds.
It's mad because you talk about IMD Q1, and that's the sort of stuff I talk about in my day job, but no one else outside of work knows what it means. I'm sat here now on a show about boxing, and we're talking about
indices of multiple deprivation. So that's fascinating that you work in that.
It's massive, mate. In boxing, honestly, that is like the headline statistic that I would always quote to people when you're talking about funding, because that's the one thing. I remember I was sat in a meeting with Sport England one time, and it was they were talking about all these different sports. They flashed a graphic up on screen, and basically it showed boxing versus all the other sports, and it was like, you know, on a kind of colour scale, and it was green to red. And literally, boxing was the polar opposite to every other sport. Bar like maybe I think basketball and football have quite sort of a similar kind of picture in some sense, but obviously they're so much bigger in terms of numbers. So it was fascinating, to be honest.
Why do you think that is? That boxing gyms tend to populate sort of IMDQ1 areas, and I suppose for those that don't know, that is areas of high crime, low socioeconomic background, those sorts of things. So why is it that boxing gyms tend to frequent those areas, do you think?
I think it's something about the sport. Like it's the thing with boxing and boxing as a sport and boxing clubs. If you think about it, if you're a kid that's living in one of those kind of areas, there's something about boxing that makes it a little bit more accessible. There's kind of like it's more credible in young people's eyes in some sense. So like if you're a kid and you're potentially going down the wrong path, let's say you're a kid involved in like gangs in some way or something, it's far easier to say to your mates, I'm going down the boxing gym, I'm going to learn how to fight, than saying I'm going down the polo club or I'm going down the golf club. Do you know what I mean?
It's true.
So there's something about boxing that kind of like, it's a hook. There's actually a document that I used to quote quite a lot when I was at England Boxing called The Right Hook, which I always thought was quite a good little play on words. But definitely. It's the thing with that document, it picks out a lot of these points around boxing is that right hook for these people. It brings the right kind of kids who are at risk of going down the wrong path, and it hooks them in a positive way. So I'd say that's part of it, but also the kind of the nature of the sport is quite a working class sport, or very much a working class sport. So as a result, just geographically, you tend to find. I always used to think when I was in my previous job, you know, when I'm trying to find the local boxing gym, you just know that you go through all these lovely parts of cities, and then you always know you're going to the roughest estate. It's just the way it is. It's just there's all sorts of reasons, I guess.
So with that in mind, one thing that I picked up on when you was talking about your time playing rugby and then your early career, you said you used to stay up and watch the big fights. What are some of the memories of some of the big fights that you used to watch?
Do you know what? One that always stuck out to me was when I was at uni. I stayed up and I watched, it was Manny Pacquiao against Oscar De La Hoya, I think. And it was when Manny Pacquiao absolutely destroyed him. And I was almost like quite sad watching it in some ways, but it was such an incredible display. That's one that always like stuck out to me as like Manny Pacquiao was unbelievable. Like when I was really sort of getting into the sport, like him, Floyd Mayweather, I used to stay up and watch all the Mayweather fights. Like for me, a lot of people found him boring, but I just found it it was unbelievable. Like what he could do, the way that he could make people a little bit like Terence Crawford the other week. He could make elite fighters look bang average. For me, it was phenomenal. So,
and there was always that level with Floyd Mayweather. And looking back, I understand why they had to do it. But you know, they made you believe maybe 1% that he might lose. This might be the guy. This might be the style he hasn't seen before. Yeah. And realistically, it never was the case. Obviously, we know that now. But and a lot of people knew it then. But watching the Showtime sort of 24 hours or HBO 24 hours, whatever it was at the time, it's compelling viewing. It's actually very interesting to get sucked into the narrative and stay up and then watch the fight at 5 a.m. in the morning.
I think that's something that boxing's getting a lot better at as well. I think the UFC are very, very good at selling the narrative around fights.
So good.
You know, quite often you can find yourself when you're watching the UFC, because I'm big into that as well.
Yeah, I love it.
I find that when you watch the UFC, you may not know who either of the fighters are before you watch it. But they always do that little narrative spin around, like you know, a little bit around the camp, whatever it is. And by the time the fight comes around, you're pulling for one man versus the other.
Yeah.
Like you are always rooting for one fighter. And I think that, I know that Matchroom particularly do a lot around that. Yep. Some of the way that they promote fights is similar in ways to the UFC. And I think boxing in general has picked up on that. And it's something that's really important for me, how you spin that narrative. And I think equally, we'll come on to it with my role now with Matchroom, but like I think a lot of the ways that we're involving the fighters in communities also helps to build fighters in a different way and builds a narrative around them and around connecting them at grassroots, which again connects them with the fans in a different way.
Yeah, I think we can jump straight into that, because one thing I've noticed recently is that it is really, really difficult to build fighters nowadays. I think part of it has to do with with the TikTok generation or whatever. We want content now. We want buzz now. We haven't really got the patience for a build up.
Yeah.
And that often means we're asking to put 3-0 fighters in with 10-0 fighters because we want to see the fight, but really it's not the fight we should see at that point in time. So I've also noticed that we don't really have a geographical spread of stars anymore. And a lot of our stars are concentrated in and around the sort of south of England. Do you think that has to do with the sort of, prior to yourself, lack of community engagement between the sport and the people?
I don't know really. I think I'd like to think there's a relatively decent sort of spread of like geographically as to where the fighters are coming from. I think you just got to look at the weekend gone by. In fact, I spent a little bit of time with Graham Rutherford from Berkeley Amateur Boxing Gym at the weekend. He was there with Cyrus Patterson, and obviously there was a huge upset at the weekend. And just looking at like the amount of talent that comes out from the northeast and how that area is going to boom over the next few years.
True.
Liverpool, there's so much talent coming out of Liverpool at the moment. Birmingham going back there at the weekend. There was there's areas that historically there's been a lot of talent, but then Matchroom haven't been there for 5 years.
Yes.
So, to have Galal coming through, to have like Sol Dakers on the card, to have, the big upset with Connor Walker, these guys coming through. You got obviously Ben Whittaker's with Boxer. Like there's all these kids are coming through. I mean, even to be fair, we went to Acox Green Boxing Gym on the Wednesday as part of the community build-up, and there's a young girl there, Lucy Kings Wheatley, who's on GB. I don't think she's even lost the fight yet. She transitioned over from kickboxing, and very, very talented girl. So I think that for me, there's quite a decent spread of it, and I think that's what I want to try and do with my role, is to try and sort of like shine a brighter light on that, so people become more aware. Like actually, there are all these different areas, all these different cities we're visiting. There's talent in all these places. Maybe we just don't know about it yet.
Yeah, I think that's probably where we're coming at it from, is the sense that there are big stars and then there's prospects, but the gulf between the two in terms of fan bases, in terms of hype, in terms of narrative and story, it does seem to be quite big. But it would be nice to see, like you say, a more even spread across the country of those up and coming stars. And I think those next gen shows actually are achieving that. And I suppose they develop over time into DAZN shows, into pay-per-view shows. So I suppose there's a pipeline there in place. Definitely. So, okay, let's get into that new role of yours then. So you went from Northamptonshire Sport to where? Where was next?
To England Boxing, it would have been then.
And what was that process like?
So basically, as I say, I was working with 16 different sports, and boxing was always my favourite. I did loads of great work across all different sports, to be honest, and I've still always stayed in touch with people from wherever, because for me, it's people always say it's not what you know, it's who you know. Networking is the key when you're working in sport. Did that. Then I started at England Boxing, and I was there for 5.5 years altogether. So I started off as the club support officer for just the East Midlands region, and then probably about 2.5, 3 years in, I also took on the Eastern counties and part of the home counties. So I ended up looking after around about probably just over 200 boxing clubs.
Wow!
So there was quite a lot, and again, very, very different areas. So obviously the East Midlands, you had like your Northants, Leicestershire, Notts, Links, Derby, and within that you've got some quite heavily urban built-up areas, bigger cities, and then in the Eastern counties it's very much a lot more rural. So you used to find like you'd have the urban deprivation in the East Midlands, in the East Mids, and also bits of the home counties. But in the Eastern counties, it was very much like rural deprivation. You'd maybe have like a lot of clubs would say to me like, "Oh, I don't think we can really get funding because we're not in like in a city kind of area." I'm like, "Well, no, of course you can. Like, you just need to sell it in a different way.
Yeah.
So you need to sort of sell that rural deprivation. Like, we're the only indoor facility in the area, so we need more investment in that sense." So yeah, it was fascinating. I loved it. I loved the job. As I say, I was there 5.5 years and did all sorts of different projects. Helped, bring millions of pounds really into the sport in different ways through different projects and various different things we were working on. It was brilliant, and that job, everything I learnt there and all the people I met allowed me to take the next step to where I am now at Matchroom. So
nice. I mean, I must confess, my grasp of the amateur side of the sport is limited, and actually it's through this show that I'm developing that knowledge of getting to know amateur boxers and understanding the way gyms work, etc. So with that in mind, if you could spell out sort of your engagement in the amateur scene, and particularly in England boxing, who are you sort of crossing paths with, are you crossing paths with like the Olympic team? Is that the right path?
Yeah, so basically, our head office was based up at the EIS in Sheffield, the English Institute of Sport. So I wasn't up there all the time. I was based from home, and I was very much like out in the field, all over the place, all over the country, visiting the clubs that I look after. But that said, when I was up in Sheffield, I remember my first week, like I think I was like collecting some printing from the office or whatever, and like AJ just bowled past me, and it was kind of like, oh, this is quite, it's going from where I was in Northampton to then like go out there and just like, oh, I mean, I'm involved in the boxing world. Is this like normal? Like, you know, you come across AJ at the printer kind of thing.
Spell that out, like AJ. At what point is this? What year are we talking?
2018 it would have been.
So he's champion.
Yeah. It was. Do you know what? I'm trying to think which time it would have been, because the second time I saw AJ at head office, I used to see him all the time, but I always remember like the first couple.
Yeah.
And the second time I saw him was actually the day that he found out about Jarrell Miller failing the test.
Mate.
So yeah, it was just crazy, because he was kind of like, yeah, I'll take whatever, you know, I'll do, see what happens. Then everyone knows what.
That's peak confidence, AJ, as well. That's
yeah.
That's I'll go through anyone. Wow, that is crazy. And how do you go back? Like, because again, I'm thinking of like where we're at in terms of our interest in the sport. Like, if I'm at AJ, I might have to call in sick the next day and be like, listen, let me just cool down and try and get some content out of this. What can I produce in terms of a YouTube short or a TikTok or whatever to get this moment across? What's going through your mind at this point? Are you trying to just what's the word I'm looking for? Underact.
Yeah, I guess back then, like very now, I'm not saying like I'm well used to it and everything, but like you get to meet so many of these people. It's kind of like, and especially when you become involved in the industry, I always wanted to like, I never necessarily wanted to like be like a bit of a fanboy around them. I've always wanted to get to the point where like I'm on a level with these people.
Yeah.
So I never sort of really wanted to kind of like I say, act like a fan around them. I wanted to like speak to them. So I remember speaking to him about like his old amateur club Finchley and seeing like what was going on there, and just trying to like just get to know him a little bit. Like you can't get loads of time with them, but just try to a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of how I found it. But don't get me wrong, like when you meet, I think it's a little bit more. You get a little bit more starstruck around people like of significant level of fame, but also when they're like. When it's a heavyweight boxer, there's something physically about them that's quite intimidating as well. They're like
something. Giants.
Well, that's what I mean.
Vikings.
Yeah, this is it. So it's a little bit different when they're like a physically imposing presence as well, as he is. Because I remember like shaking his hand, and his hands are like shovels. Do you know what I mean? So
we met. We had Nico on a few months ago, and it was the weekend after I met Derek Chisora. And Derek Chisora's not that tall, right? Yeah. But he's massive.
He's just wide.
And he shook my hand, and it was like. This is long, like there's no way a normal man who hasn't trained boxing is fighting Derek Chisora and winning. Like it's just his aura was just scary.
Honestly, they're huge. Like the heavyweight boxers, until you actually like you're around them and you sort of like, particularly in like less so when you're in a gym environment, but more so when you're in like a press conference type environment. Like you see them in like plain clothes essentially. That's when you realise the extent of like how big they are. And then when you actually think about it, I always find it like, because I've done little bits of sparring and stuff over the years, but I'm not actually like, say, not from a boxing background. Been around it a lot though. And when you actually think about like that person punching you, I honestly like it. I can't comprehend how that's physically possible.
It's mad, isn't it?
To take the shots they do.
And then you see their opponents like still standing.
Yeah, it's just mad.
And you think, what's in your skull?
Yeah.
Because like I just know, innit? If AJ lands on me,
do you know what I mean?
It's I might not wake up. You know what I'm saying? It might be night. So it's absolutely mad that Hellenius or you know Andy Ruiz or whoever has got up from some of those shots.
It's crazy,
and just
man.
says, yeah, throw the next one. It's mental, but very interesting. I imagine over some point you become desensitized to it, but equally you're in. What must be interesting from your perspective is you're in an environment where these talents are being nurtured. So you never know actually who you're seeing, who might be the next big thing. Like how's that? That must be quite interesting.
You can. So I remember like if I think back to like going to some of the championships over the years, like the schools, the juniors, the youths, and particularly the senior elites as well. Like you knew there's always ones that stand out. There's always ones that you see that you think like. There's something about them. They're going to go on to something. So like one that stood out for me was Dalton Smith. First sort of like when I first started, Dalton was probably coming into, I think it would have been seniors, like his first year as a senior. And he was just, there was something about him. He was just very, very good. It wasn't the fact he was beating people. It was the way he was beating people. Another one, to be fair, was Sam Noakes.
the way that he went through. He was stopping a lot of people.
Is he Queensbury now, isn't he?
Yeah. He stood out for me as well as someone. Lewis Williams, who went on to win the Commonwealth Games gold up in Birmingham with some boxers out of Cleary's in Leamington. Lewis was one that stood out, and obviously, as I say, he went on to win the Commonwealth Games at heavyweight. Delicious Ori. I see him the other day. Yeah. So like you see these ones coming through, and you just know, like with someone like Delicious, he was very, very raw, and to an extent, in some ways, he still is. But he's like, there's something about him, and he just keeps developing. He's a very intelligent lad. From a PR perspective, he's an absolute dream. He speaks so well. Like there's like an X factor about certain people. Another one would be more recently would be Giorgio Vizioli. He's just signed with Matchroom. I saw Giorgio a couple of years ago, and he won the senior elites at 2 weights, 60 and 63, 63 and a half. Sorry, and. There's something about him that you could just see, like the talent is just a little bit different, and he's, as I say, just been signed by Matchroom, so you just spot him.
And I suppose as well, part of it is you realise just how difficult the sport must be to be that level of where you're spotting that difference in talent. They must be 0.001% of those who walk into a boxing gym, but I think to that point, there's so much more you can gain from walking in a boxing gym than just being the 0.01 good one in there.
Massively.
Talk us through that, like some of the benefits of being in a boxing gym and just being around that system.
So that's a huge part of what I'm trying to do in my role with Matchroom. Like it's yes, of course we want like the next AJ. We want these talented people, and people that get signed by Matchroom, fantastic. That's a huge element of the business. But I've been brought in specifically to help develop the sport at grassroots and using the platform that Matchroom has. So as I say, like we went down to Acott's Green the other day, we went to Limehouse in London the other week. When you stood in that gym, there's like, at Acott's Green, there's probably like 80, 85 kids. It was a really big turnout. And I remember saying the other day on an interview I did for one of the YouTube platforms, it's like when you're in there, there's probably 2, 3, 4 people that are going to go on to be professional boxers. At best, maybe a couple more, but not, certainly percentage-wise, it's a low percentage-wise. So what you're looking at is like the other benefits of getting into boxing. So it's the physical health, it's the friendships you're going to make, it's the mental health and well-being that you're going to get out of being in the gym. It's all those social skills. It's kind of, giving your life a positive direction rather than potentially all the risks there are for young people these days. If you're in a boxing gym, there's good role models. There are these people that will go on to bigger things. It's all those kind of things that boxing can do for you that people sometimes don't even think about. They just always focus on like, here's the talent. Is this the next Anthony Joshua? Is it the next Canelo? Is it the next Terence Crawford? Whatever. That's amazing. We all want to see those role models and those amazing, talented fighters. But it's all those kids that boxing changes their life. Just by going into the gym one time, like they might be getting bullied at school. They might be a little bit overweight, so they lose a bit of weight going down there. They might make friends. They might just become more confident. It's all those things that for me boxing is all about.
Yeah, I tell you what, the one thing I love about, we were talking about the UFC earlier, and it's combat sports generally, and I suppose sports to some extent, is a sense of that ability to fail and it not be an endpoint, and it not be your identity. There's so many more opportunities to try. I mean, even if undefeated boxer, they must lose a round in sparring, or they must have a bad day at the gym, but they keep going. And that fortitude is something that we were speaking about off air, weren't we? Yeah. And a lot of young people in particular could benefit from that fortitude of just that freedom to fail
100%.
And keep going. So let's talk a bit about that role at Matchroom then, because someone told me that effectively this was a role that you had to go out there and make for yourself. So talk us through that part of the journey.
Yeah, it's crazy to be honest how it all came about. So as I say, when I was at England Boxing, I was always very focused on that role there and trying to look at like the best ways that we can shine a brighter light on amateur boxing and boxing in the community. So where it all actually began, if you go right back to like the story as it started, when Kieron Conway from our gym was boxing in Dallas on the Canelo Alvarez Billy Joe Saunders.
Who was that again? That was
Sissoko.
That was it. Yeah.
So I was fortunate to go out with Kieron and his dad and the rest of the team.
What was that like?
Oh, mad! Like the most insane experience ever. Because over here, actually, as well, on a bit of a tangent, that was it was still kind of like semi-lockdown conditions here. When we went out to the States, it wasn't. So like we went from like if you think about it, it was like fight camp kind of stuff here.
Yeah.
Very small, like no one could really do much. We went out there and it was like 73,000. It was the biggest. It still is the biggest US boxing event of all time. So honestly, I can't even explain what that was like. It was mad. And when Kieron boxed, he was
2 before the main event. So it was about 64,000. It was mad.
You're feeling that noise in your bones, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I always remember, like, Eddie always says, like, you know, they say, why'd you promote? Why'd you get into boxing? What is it about boxing? And he always like says something around if you can feel like experience like even a percentage of the adrenaline the fighter gets. And it's nights like that, the big stadium shows, the big like arena shows, they're the ones where you really, really do get that buzz. But equally, you can still get that buzz, because I remember I had that same buzz down at the park-in recently with one of our amateur boxers, came to us with a losing record, won his first fight. Like I think he came to us with an 0-5 record, and it was all about getting him a win. Let's get him a win. And I remember the kid won, and it was just how that made you feel. You know, it almost brings a tear to your eyes. Just like you know the journey they've been on to get there. You know, like you're saying, the adversity they've had to overcome. So yeah, you know, you go from your AT&T stadiums to your park-in, same buzz. Same. It's just the same.
That sounds incredible, man.
But yeah, no, it's cool. But as I say, going back to what you were saying about the role, so yeah, it all came about there. What I've always been a person that, like, I'm never sort of it's a strength and a weakness. I'm never like quite content. I always want to push on to the next thing. So when I was there, I'm not just happy like there being making up the numbers, being, you know, wrapping Kieron's hands or whatever I'm going to do. I want to get the maximum amount of the experience that I possibly can. So I remember I saw Frank Smith in the lobby of the hotel, and we'd been chatting to like him and Eddie little bits and pieces, but I hadn't like properly introduced myself, and he obviously didn't know what I did for a job. So I went over and just had a chat with him and just sort of said, look, you know, I think there's loads we could do from a community boxing angle, utilising the Matchroom platform. So, you know, this was like 3 years ago now. And from there, got his number, and we sort of like stayed in touch, just always like texting, little bits and pieces. We set up a meeting when I was with England still. We had that meeting. You know, we pitched basically like a bit of a partnership agreement, how this could work. And it was always really, really positive. But obviously with Matchroom, the way it works, and I understand more now working for them, it's like you have one show, on to the next show, on to the next show. Yeah. And it's very hard to like get things done if it's not the absolute priority at that moment in time. The priority for them is the next event, and there's so many coming up. Like it's literally every week around the world. So yeah, that kind of all happened, and I guess like it would have been about 5-6 months ago now. I kind of got to a point. I've been at England Boxing for about 5 years at the time. It would have been, and I sort of, you know, I got to 5 years, and I was kind of like, right, I'm doing lots of things here. I've advanced as much as I possibly. I've done about as much as I can possibly do now at this point. I love the job, but what is next? What could I do? So I just I thought to myself, like, who's the best person on my phone to sort of like text for a little bit of advice around getting into like the pro game, getting into this, getting into that. So I thought I'll just text Frank. So so I did, really only looking for like some advice and guidance. And he texts me back and he says, I tell you what, like, let's have a call, mate. And I was like, oh, cool. I think you might be opening the door a little bit here to like at least the discussion. Yeah. And so we do that. We arrange a call, and yeah, we kind of we start talking, and I think I was kind of like, I had an idea, because Matchroom have a charitable foundation that a lot of people don't know about, and they've invested like about £3 million into like good causes over the last like few years. Like so much money goes out, and when you consider Matchroom's it is fundamentally a family business. Yeah, it's insane the amount of money they give back to good causes, but there's not there hasn't been a proper strategy behind it. And it hasn't been documented well enough, really. In some ways, that's like quite humble, and they don't want to sort of shout about it. Yeah. But I think in some senses it's good, and it's good to do that and promote it a little bit more, especially as the company is a promotional company. So so that was really like the nuts and bolts of my idea. And anyway, long story short, like we had this chat, and Frank said to me, "I'll tell you what, then, like, put a proposal together as to like how you believe you could like." Your involvement could benefit the business, what you could do from a community angle, and we'll kind of go from there. And I thought to myself, like, he's opened the door here, like, so I'm not just going to like go for it. I'm going to like jump through it. Yeah. So he said, take your time, take as long as you need, whatever. But I thought, well, okay, you can take as long as you need, but you also need to like, how long do you take?
Yeah, so, capture the moment.
This is it, capture the moment. So so yeah, in about I think it would have been about 3 to 4 weeks, I put together a proposal document that was about 12,500 words. So as I say, it was longer than my dissertation. Jeez. It was just I just went for it. I fully went for it, and I clipped it up into 2 ways. So I did like the full shebang, 12,500, and obviously like an executive summary, which was like 3-4 pages.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, well, if you read through the executive summary, you'll get a good idea of what you want. To this day, I've actually never asked him how much he's read. I will when I'll plug at the Courage soon. I'll go, mate.
We'll clip this video. You can ask him now. Yeah.
This is it. How much did you actually read?
Yeah.
But yeah, like I've got a friend who's a graphic designer, Tonya Ibrahim. Massive shout out. She made it look really, really smart, and I remember they actually commented on that as well. So yeah, massive thanks to Tonya for doing that.
Yeah.
And it's so we put it all together, and I sent it across, and it was kind of like he actually when it actually came around to me going down for like further information and stuff, he messaged me and he says, "Oh, how'd you fancy meeting up around the I think it was the most recent Manchester show. Can't remember who headlined it now. Might have been, I think it was Lee Wood. It was Wood Lara 2. So he invited me down to meet him there, but I was actually on holiday, so I was kind of like I've been waiting, a little bit for some feedback, and I was on holiday. I was like, man, I can't do that day. So then I had to go down the following week. And I was kind of thinking, like, what's he want to talk about? And I went down thinking that he was, I need to pitch like my idea to him, but obviously he must have read it, and he basically said, like we want to offer you a job. And I was kind of like, yeah, cool, I'm down for that. So,
mate,
and that's where we are. So yeah, a little bit like Dragon's Den sort of thing, I guess.
That's I mean, I just want to ask you in terms of like, that feels like it was the sort of peak of many actions, like the result of many actions, many thoughts, you got the guy's number, you messaged him, you maintained the relationship. You saw an opportunity, you asked them a question, all these sorts of things. Has that been something that's sort of been there throughout your life? Like if you think back to your sort of teenage years and your sort of adolescent years, has that sort of initiative been part of you?
Yeah, I've always, like, as I say, I'm never like content. I'm always one of these people like, what's next? I'm very, very ambitious. So it's now I'm at Matchroom now. I've got my role. I've got the dream role. Like this is what I've always wanted to do. For years, I've wanted to build up to it. But now I'm like, okay, now I want to like go bigger. I want to build a team. I want to make like things a success in the UK, but then I want to replicate it in the US. I want to go out to the Middle East, and I want to do stuff out there, and I want to grow the sport out there, utilising Matchroom's platform. So it's always, I'm in an amazing position to do amazing things here now, but it's always like, what's next? Always. And I've always been like that. It's always been like with sport, it's always like when I was playing rugby, cricket, whatever it was always like, what's next? And I think it's, I get that from people I've been around though. Like my mum and dad have always been so supportive of me. I've always had a really good friend group, like, and now being around people like Kieron, around Ethan, these guys, around elite athletes, like, I was playing sport to a good level when I was younger, but that now I spend all my time around elite sports people. So that kind of mindset has just been around me for a lot of my life. So yeah, I guess it does link in a way.
Wicked. So, all right, they say they want to offer you a job. And again, to that point of when you see AJ walking past you at the printer, you sort of got to hold it down a little bit. Okay, yeah. AJ. When they offer you the job, and that's your dream job, what's your reaction?
I was kind of like, I was blown away, to be honest, because as I say, I wasn't expecting that like in that moment.
Yeah,
I was very much like thinking to myself, I'm going here to like. I remember sort of like going through the whole thing in my head in the car on the way down, and that's what I thought I was there for. So I was shocked. I was shocked at like the way it was going, and also I was shocked at like, this isn't what I prepared for. But I think by that point I'd become a little bit desensitized to being around Frank, because I'd been around him a few times, and I'd been in meetings with him and that kind of thing. But I mean, when I first met him, it was very much like, you're looking for the right. I remember like you see him or you see Eddie across like the lobby, and you're thinking, is he busy right now? Do you think this is a good time? You're just overthinking it. Whereas actually, you're best to just go for it. Like I'll always say that to anyone. Like you just go for it. I think it was there's a lady called October Red. She runs a YouTube platform. She's brilliant, really, really good. Like we did the event with her last week. She was a driving force behind it, and she said to me, like, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And she's so right. Like if you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. It's always best to just like approach someone. The worst that you're ever going to get is like, oh, sorry, I can't do that. Like, do you know what I mean? That's the way I'd say.
I'll tell you what, I'm going to hold myself accountable then on the show, because I was at the AJ show a couple of weeks ago, and I saw Charlie Parsons. I thought I recognise, and you know, obviously we do a show and all that sort of stuff. So I thought there could be some real synergies here. And I thought I was in the middle of a row, which is the worst place to be. Next time I want to be on the end of any row I'm on because I want to be able to leave really quickly, right? Yeah. But I was thinking I've got to go past like 8 people. Sorry, excuse me. Sorry, it's, you know, all of that nonsense. And then like he's at a show, like he probably doesn't want to talk to someone who says, "Yeah, I've got a YouTube channel." You know, I thought myself out of it basically. Yeah. Whereas next time, and obviously the answer was no. Whereas next time I'm going to go up to him or whoever I see and be like, you know what, actually, we run Sofa SENSEIS. It would be good if we could get like a quick video from you or whatever and just see what their reaction is because they might say yes.
We'll sort that because so Charlie's a good mate. So
is he?
Yeah. So when we're done, we'll text him. And
Perfect.
We'll get onto it because I was with him all last week.
Oh,
so
mate.
So we'll sort that.
Because I see he's doing some crazy things. He's like 20 years old, isn't he?
Mate, he's quality. Honestly, him, Joe Pugh, IFL, the pair of them. Like I was with them on, was it Friday night? We were talking about like how they got into it. And there's another young lad as well, Josh Hart. I done an interview with him the other day. He's only 17. And honestly, like I've got so much time for these young lads that are putting the time in, putting the work in.
Yeah.
Like, and you can see the ones that are there, they keep showing up. Like, you know, some people like you see like the sort of traditional media knocking some of the YouTube platforms and what they do and all this. Yeah. But when you're actually around like guys like Parsons, guys like Joe, guys like Josh, these ones that are really like pushing it, and the way that like Charlie is like built that relationship he's got with Eddie, like that's not like, you can see it. Obviously, like you've got to have something about you and something, you know, it's almost like, you know, Eddie will like choose people that he likes, whatever. Yeah. But there's an element of that. But actually, there's so much of it which is like the hard work and how you need to like maintain that relationship. That takes a lot of work. I think absolute fair play to him.
Mate, travelling up and down the country every week and, you know, like you say, fostering those relationships, that cannot be underplayed. I'm sorry, because I see the traditional media and I understand they have a role to play. But equally, if you want a instant reaction, you're not refreshing the Telegraph. Yeah. Or other platforms are available. I don't want to, you know, call in on that. But you're refreshing Twitter because you're seeing if IFL have posted anything or Boxing Social have posted anything. And to be fair to sort of the traditional media, the boxing news, I know they have like ID Sports and all those sorts of things. They are pretty on the money as well. But you're refreshing the YouTube channels because you want to see what's happened. Yeah.
And it's accessible to the younger generation. That's the thing. There's a market now for all these different people because, you know, news is digested in a different way. And I think, as I say, I think the work that like your IFLs, your Boxing Socials, your YouTube platforms, they do brilliantly. And for me recently, they've been so as well as like BBC's, ITV's, these guys are backing and come along to the community engagement events we're doing. That in itself just shines a much brighter light on the work that we're doing as well. Yeah. So massively supportive.
Well, look, I don't know if you only wrote yourself a role because it seems to me you also wrote yourself an IFL new channel. I hadn't seen IFL Wants to Watch before your role came about.
I hadn't, and it was like I saw it. I actually saw that, and I texted Oscar Bevis because again, Oscar's a good mate, and I said, like, mate, there's loads we can do here. Like this is basically like a YouTube channel for what we're trying to do. Yeah. So like I've pitched loads of ideas to them around what we're going to do, and I think like I'm going to really try and help them in terms of like strategizing the best ways of doing that, because again it's just like connecting the amateurs with, you know, the wider community and people understanding like this is amateur boxing, these are the kids coming through, these are the ones to watch. I think it's brilliant that IFL have done that. And like I say, in my role, it's I can support, but equally so can the other promoters as well.
Yeah. And to your point around Delicious and him being sort of PR ready already, that is so important, particularly when you're trying to capture the attention of people in boxing right now in terms of fans. That ability to be able to answer a question in a compelling way, have a story, have a personality, and get that across is so important. So platforms like IFL Wants to Watch will sort of just prime that talent. By the time they sort of graduate to the standard IFL channel, that they'll be ready.
Absolutely.
And you touched on something I want to talk about there, just before we get into sort of the type of communities you engage with. Other promoters. So, as what happens is when you're a first mover, you know, you get that advantage, people know you exist. Yeah. But is there going to be a sort of Ben Shalom version of you cropping up in Boxer, and or Queensbury or whatever the other promoters? Do you anticipate that happening, or do you think?
I don't know. I don't know enough about what those guys do to know how much of a priority like community development and this kind of angle is. For me, I would
I would always encourage that the more people that are trying to showcase what's going on, the better. But what I'd always say is that Matchroom will do it the biggest and we'll do it the best, like we do all the time.
That's that Matchroom energy. Did you see that? Yeah, listen, that is. I love that. And that's one thing I love about Eddie is confidence, because not only is it confidence, it's like there's a track record of delivering the biggest events time and time again. And he made me laugh, actually. I don't really like to timestamp the episodes, but I'll do it anyway. He made me laugh yesterday because, what did you say? Frank must have said something. Frank Warren must have said something, right? Yeah. And he's like, yeah, well, when you're promoting in York Hall and there's no AC, you know, you sort of get a bit flustered. It's just those little digs of Eddie's, man. He makes me laugh. But anyway.
He's hilarious, mate. To be fair, he is genuinely hilarious to be around. Him and Frank as well. Like, I don't know if you saw, there was, they did a YouTube, on YouTube the other week, they played a round of golf with Tubes. I saw that. And, oh my God, and Jimmy Bullard. That was hilarious, and that is exactly what the pair of them are like all the time. So honestly, if anyone's like sitting out there like, oh, what are Eddie and Frank like, watch that video, and that is what it's like, and that's mainly what it's like around the events, around everything, in the office, everything.
Yeah, and I tell you what must be mad as well. We've mentioned this in the podcast before, and I won't delve into someone's personal life too deep, but I find it fascinating that Frank is with Eubank's daughter, because could you that must be so political when you factor in Eubank Ben and all those sorts of that must just be, you must have to just draw a line in work and personal life, right?
I think, Frank is extremely good at that as well. Frank is from the short period of time I've been with Matchroom so far and being around him a lot of the time, Frank is his attention to detail is so hard working. I honestly there's one of the best things for me about working at Matchroom is the amount of time I get to spend around people like Frank, people like Eddie, people like Ross Garrity, people like Darren Flewers on logistics, everyone. The team are just so good at what they do. Matty Lawless just coming in on comms, Dan Barnard. Everyone is the best at what they do. Yeah. And I just feel like I'm absorbing so much by being around these people. To go back to your point, I'd say I don't know. It's a very the one thing with Frank I've always thought is obviously he's engaged to Emily. I've always thought that Eddie's going to be the best man, and you've got father of the bride as Chris Eubank Senior.
Mate,
what a wedding to go to.
Listen,
you know what I mean?
Someone needs to get those speeches on pay-per-view, man, because
you know what I mean?
I would love to hear what Eddie has to say as best man in front of Eubank, and then I'd love to see Eubank's response.
Probably do the impression.
Oh, no. Listen. We'd have a wedding and a funeral, man. Jesus. Yeah, that would be crazy. Keep us updated with that. I'd be interested to see what happens. But yeah, so Matchroom as an entity is obviously, the best promoter or the biggest promoter in the UK. So it's great to see that you've got a platform with those guys. Mm-hmm. And, from a personal point of view, it's great to see that Northampton has the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to get stuck in it and sort of shift the communities going on. If you could outline then your top 3 priorities in your role that you created, what would they be?
I'd say really it would be around, for me with Matchroom, it's around funding, the funding distribution. So what I want to do, we've obviously got funds that are available through the Charitable Foundation, and I want to distribute those funds to the most impactful and the most necessary areas. So for me, I'm coming up with essentially a funding distribution strategy as to how we'll do that. So that's something I'm heavily working on. I think it's really the awareness and exposure as well are 2 other things that are so important for me. So we've got all of these kind of all the media partners we have. We've got Eddie, you've got Frank Smith, who in their own right have got really big platforms. I mean, Eddie's huge. And until you actually work at Matchroom, you don't realise quite how busy and how big Eddie is. That's another part. And then also, I think something for me it's really interesting will be to helping connect the fighters with the communities and how that improves the way that they're promoted in different ways, or not improves, but sort of just changes it a little bit. Yeah. And how that. In the long term kind of helps better connect people with their communities in a sense. So there's so many different things that are floating around, I guess, that we're looking to do.
I think one thing I wanted to touch on is because I know we've discussed sort of young people as a broad community in different areas and both geographical communities too. But one thing I want to sort of bring up is the idea of ex-boxers as a community and any potential ideas for developing that, because I think particularly as so for SENSEIS, we always, I always have a lens. I ask fighters about if they ever talk about, Tris Dixon's book Damage.
Mm-hmm.
I always ask our fighters if they talk about that. And first of all, have you read that book and what are your thoughts on it? And second of all, I think there's a real opportunity there to sort of develop that community of ex-boxers and just smoothen that path out. And Matchroom being the biggest, in my view, have a responsibility to smoothen that path out from being an active fighter to being a retired, healthy, happy, and well looked after ex-fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that is something I'm definitely looking to do. So in terms of like short, medium, long term, where that will fit, I'm not sure. But I'm looking to do something around like mental health and how we can kind of, there's a lot of ex-boxers that have struggled in terms of that particularly that transition into retirement as well. So that's something we're definitely looking at doing. In fact, I was only talking yesterday morning at breakfast with a guy about this around Kash Farouk was obviously a fighter that recently retired, and looking at ways that we could potentially, I know he's heavily involved in community development up in Scotland, so it's ways that we can maybe do some stuff with him. I've done bits and pieces in the past with Tommy Coyle, who's another person, and obviously a great character.
Manchester, is it?
He is Hull.
That's
Hull base, and he's got. Tommy does loads. He's got his Box Clever bus that goes around different communities. There's an amazing video that he did last year where he's talking to a young person on the street and just sort of like getting him on the straight and narrow, and just kind of like he's an incredibly engaging character, but it's someone that has openly said that he struggled with the idea of retirement. So I think it's ways that we can use these fighters to, they've struggled, but they're doing well with it now. Like they and if we can sort of like utilize them as in an ambassadorial kind of like perspective or whatever it is, I think that'd be a really good way to keep them connected with the sport. I mean, for me, Tommy would be a great person, almost as like a front man for some of the community stuff we're doing. Bit of a host if we're doing any like different sort of projects.
He's got a personality, isn't he?
He's got the personality. So there's all sorts of different ways. But yeah, it's certainly something that I want to do, and I think it's really important to do.
Do you know what? It's really true. And actually, thinking about the parallels between the UFC and what they've been doing, they had prior to their buyout by Endeavour, they had sort of I can't remember what they were called, like UFC brand ambassadors, something along those lines. Chuck Liddell was one, BJ Penn was one, and since then, because Endeavour, when they bought the UFC, they got rid of those roles. You've then seen Chuck Liddell go out and fight again. All these things that we don't want to see. Like the guy's paid his dues. He's done what he's done for the sport, and he should be a legend forever. He shouldn't have to go out there and fight again. But ultimately, fighting is what these guys know. Yeah, I always remember one of my favourite build-ups of all time was Chisora versus Hay. And when that whole press conference thing happened, Frank Warren went on the PR offensive, understandably so, and he says that the board can't and shouldn't take Chisora's license from him because, and he says with the greatest respect, Derek can do nothing else. He has no qualifications. He has no other skills. All he can do is fight. And actually, you fast forward, that was 2012, you fast forward 11 years, we're still seeing Derek fight. Because what the hell else is he going to do? Yeah. Derek Chisora, with the greatest respect, is not going to be a commentator. Delicious TV is funny though, I'm not going to lie. So maybe there's a route for him there, right? But his skill is fighting. So how can, this isn't a question to you to answer right now, but how can Matchroom or how can the powers that be in boxing guide Derek out of putting his life on the line into something that makes him still feel alive? And it must be difficult because on what was the date? August 12th, whatever day it was. Yeah, August 12th. Derek Chisora had one of the biggest pops of the whole card when he came out. So it must be difficult to let that go.
Very difficult. I think it would be, a lot of fighters always say it's like the adrenaline that you get from that fight.
It's different.
It's an addiction in some ways to that. So I think like what I'm looking to do with my role will be, it may not be for everyone, but some of the projects we're getting involved with, it might be that because I found, if you think back to recent examples, like on Wednesday at Acox Green, every single person, Eddie included, all the fighters included, everyone said I've got a right buzz being there, seeing those kids on the punch machine, doing these, the impact that visit made on those young people. You do get an adrenaline buzz from it. So it's only marginal compared to what they're going to get in the ring. But if we can put on projects that are really impactful, meaningful, and they get even a tiny little bit of that buzz, then that might help them and support them with that transition into retirement. Yep. So that would be one way that I'm looking to do things. But there's all sorts of stuff that we can look into. But you're absolutely right. It's an extremely important area.
Because what you don't want is for these fighters to give you all these incredible moments that you're going to remember for the rest of your lives, and then they retire and that's it, you forget about them. Yeah, that's not how it should be. So if my role can impact that in any way positively, then 100% we'll be doing it.
And I do think as a nation, we try generally to do right by our legends. Bruno was there at the weekend, or the weekend before the last one, and Bruno is still ubiquitous across the crowd. I never grew up watching Bruno, but I know who Frank Bruno is. Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? So, like, those are things that are amazing to see, and even Ricky Hatton and all these legendary names. I love seeing Johnny Nelson, because Johnny Nelson has he's ticked the box. If you'd have looked at Johnny Nelson at the start of his career, you think this guy's going to be nothing. Like, he's not going to be that guy. Then as his career developed, he found his style and he found his rhythm, retired an undefeated champion, and then now he's the face of Sky. Yeah. And a face that is, he's a great talker, he's a great personality, he keeps himself in shape. These are all great things we want to see from our stars. So credit to yourself for building the communities and giving back with boxing, because it's clear Eddie's been on that agenda for a long time. I'm glad he's now got a strategy in place and a sort of infrastructure in place to be able to deliver it properly. And then finally, is there anything else you want to let the people know in terms of what's on the agenda? You mentioned Saudi Arabia, which I'm really interested to hear more about. Let that vision out the bag, because I think I heard the impact of AJ versus Ruiz 2 and the sort of the number of gyms that were built off the back of that. Is that something you want to expand on?
I think that'll certainly be, looking forward a couple of years. For me, the immediate kind of priority is to let's make success let's get a few of my projects off the ground in the UK first, make success of those. Then we'll try and align that and do that in the US. I was on a call earlier on today looking at what we're going to do in the US around some of the shows coming up. So we got Orlando, obviously the big one coming up, we've got LA as well with Pacheco, and then you've got Bam against Sonny, which is just a huge fight. Can't wait for that one. So looking at trying to do things around that. But then, as you say, going on to the Middle East, I think I want to make a success of these things to begin with. I know that I saw an interview Eddie did the other day talking about my role, which was that was a bit sort of pinch yourself moment. And he was saying about the commitment to sort of grow a team, build a team around this. That is the idea that I've essentially created a community department, so I'm the first in that department, and then we'll grow that hopefully. So we will need more manpower to do more work. We'll need more manpower, but that said, in a few years' time, certainly be looking to, do things around the Middle East is a huge growth area for combat sports in general. You saw what they did with Fight Island and all this kind of stuff for the UFC.
That
and
looks sick.
Do you know what I mean? And then the big events that are all going out there, the Saudi Arabias, that obviously the Chantel boxed that in Abu Dhabi as well, and all this kind of stuff. So I think developing the sport from grassroots is something that will, we don't just, when we go to those areas, we don't just want to land these humongous events and that's it, and there's no legacy of it. A bit like the Commonwealth Games, the Commonwealth Games comes over and then it's all around building that legacy. Same thing when we take a big fight to Saudi Arabia or to the Middle East, in whichever country it is, we want to try and build a legacy around that and develop the sport from grassroots. So that will be something obviously within my role, head of community development, that I'll be massively involved in. So how that will look right now, I'm not sure, but it's dead exciting.
Credit to you, man. That sounds amazing, and it sounds like as well, it's something the sport needs to make those connections, to build those connections, and that sustainability in communities is really, really important. And if you're looking to grow your team, my sister's as you know, she's a England boxing apprentice, so she's wrapping that up soon. So if there's any opportunity, just let us know. The other thing I want to say...
I've always told her to stay in touch. I've always told her to. It's all about networking.
I'll remind her. You hear that, Gabrielle? It's all about networking. We mentioned Chantel Cameron there, actually, in boxing in the Middle East. And actually, we've got a little bit of story about that. So I think the fight was on... It was in November, wasn't it? Like mid to late November, I think. And early November, on the 8th specifically, because it was my anniversary, she says, look, I've got some time. I can come on the 8th. And I says, I can't make the 8th. Can we do another date? And she couldn't do another date, and we haven't had her on yet. But Chantel, if you're watching, I've got your signed glove here, undisputed world champ. This is your glove. I bid for it at one of the shoebox shows in Northampton, the Park Inn. So yeah, we're sorry we missed the date, but let's rebook that one ASAP. I thought I'd get that one in there. But yeah, okay. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was your role in shoebox actually. Mm-hmm. So let's go into that a little bit, because we've had a few shoebox alumni on the show. Our first guy was Nico Michael. So what's Nico like in the gym now? Give us a little bit behind the scenes.
He's a good lad. He's absolutely mad for it. He's always down the gym. Always. He's always putting the graft in. He's got. I think he's got a new sponsor. Is it cryotherapy?
I keep seeing him. He's modelling, man. I see him walking in the cryo machine, all slow mo and that.
He's always down there.
Good on him.
Do you know what Nico does really well? He promotes himself very well.
He's really good.
He understands that, and that's huge, especially like for small hall fighters. You know, coming through. Very much where selling tickets is so important. Nico's really grasped that. So he's a good lad.
And Tysell, because I tell you what, we had Tysell on about a year ago, maybe a little bit more. And we've been wanting to see him fight ever since, but we just can't match up our schedules. So I'm hoping to catch his September outing. What's Tysell like? Has he got power? I know he's got power. I can see it on the videos.
Ty's a really talented lad.
Yeah,
and do you know what as well? Ty, as well as being a fantastic boxer, he's an unbelievable asset for the gym as well in terms of being a great role model to the young kids.
Oh,
and he does a load of coaching down there. I don't know if you're aware. Like he does a lot of the schools outreach stuff.
Oh, brilliant.
He's up and down the country with the youngsters. He coaches all the kids' classes. And we always say, like, Ty don't mind us saying this as well. Like when he came to the gym, he had like a bit of a chip on his shoulder, to be honest. Like James and I, like we didn't really like, and I think everyone, like we didn't quite sort of like hit it off straight away with him. But the more he's kind of come down, honestly, like I couldn't say there's a nicer kid in the gym than Ty. He's a prime example of like what boxing can do for people in terms of like employability skills that he's got from it, in terms of like transferable skills. If he didn't want to be a boxer now, he's got so many transferable skills from the coaching that he can apply to other places. Ty for me would be an absolute what a role model to young people.
Love that,
as well as being a really, really talented kid with the boxing. He's definitely one to watch.
And lastly, of course, we've got to mention the mauler, Dempsey. What's he like? I know he loves the Chinese. So how do you keep him on the straight and narrow?
Is it just the Chinese? Is that all he said?
Yeah, so that's what he told us. There might be some more in some biscuits in the back pocket.
Dempsey's an absolute legend. He helped move my girlfriend into mine not long ago as well. So he's always, if you ever need a man with a van, Dempsey's your man.
All right.
So
noted.
He is the man with the van down the gym. But no, Dempsey, top boy. And as we were saying, with Dempsey, when he experienced his first loss at the park, big upset. No one really expected. No one really saw that coming. But for Dempsey to then go back to the same venue, the same changing room, the same atmosphere, in front of the same people, the mental fortitude it takes to then go out there, get the win, and get your career back on track. For me, that shows everything about the man. And I expect him to really go on to much bigger things now. Like he's a great lad, and he's like he's a bit of a throwback in some ways. Dempsey, like he's loved boxing. He wanted to box because his dad was a professional boxer, and he's got the name. He's literally named after Jack Dempsey. He couldn't do anything but box really with a name like that. So.
I'll tell you what, if you want to get stuck into Dempsey's history and he saw his dad sort of boxing in bin bags, trying to sweat off the weight, it's an incredible story. Check it out in the archives, as well as Nico, Michael and Tysell as well, all in the archives, so check that out. All right, the final thing I want to ask you about, because I'm not going to lie, before you came here, I didn't know jobs like yours existed in the sport, particularly in the sport of boxing, and they didn't because you created it, so, props to you. But I want to know, what are the perks of working at Matchroom? And I mean, because you mentioned LA, you mentioned a few shows in America. What are you going on BA looking for your own ticket? Or what? Talk us through some of the perks.
Nah, I mean, obviously, like any shows you want to go to. So for me at the minute, any UK shows, I'll be working there basically. So
mad.
And you can, in terms of access, you're sitting ringside at every single event.
Mental.
So that is, as a perk for me as a boxing fan.
Yeah.
That's about all you need, to be honest. But then obviously with my role being sort of transatlantic, I guess as well, we're going to get to experience fights out in the States. I know that some of my colleagues have told me all about the shows out in the Middle East and just all of the big events you can imagine. You basically get access to go to those. In terms of where we stay, last week, the hotel down for the O2, we were in the Intercontinental.
It's lovely there, isn't it?
Which is a really, really nice hotel. So you get to spend a lot of time there. We went out. What did we do? We went. It's like a Top Golf type of place. So we went there. It was like the whole team just go. It's obviously Matchroom just pay for everything, all your sort of entertainment and stuff like that. So they're Top Golf. I was playing with me and Darren Barker. He's a great guy.
Bro, whoa, pause. How are you saying you're just playing golf with Darren Barker?
Yeah, that's what your life becomes, which is mad. So for me as a boxing fan,
it is kind of weird. Like, so I was, if you picture this as, and again, I am a boxing fan. Fundamentally, I'm a boxing fan. So it's when I was sat down at breakfast the other day with myself and Jamie Ward, who does a lot of the fighter content stuff, does a lot of stuff to camera now as well. So he was on like Before the Bell when he was doing the in-ring interviews at the weekend. We were just having breakfast, and then Eddie comes down. He's like sat with us having breakfast. Then Darren comes over, and then Jay, one of the lawyers, comes over, and we're just all sitting there, and you're just having a chat, and like when you sit there and you actually think to yourself, like, I'm just sat here having breakfast with Eddie and Darren Barker, and it was actually 10 years to the day of Darren winning the world middleweight title. So they were sort of bantering about that, and it's just, you do pinch yourself and think like, how I ended up here. But then you think like, well, I've worked bloody hard to get here. So you always, like I say, it's kind of there is an element of like you'll always be a fan, but I think that it's really important to kind of like try to disconnect it and try to like see yourself on a level, and always like, because then you won't feel sort of like, oh, I want a bit of Eddie's time, like, you know, you want to be on a level with him, I guess.
And that's some great advice, particularly those that are working in sport. Sport is a place full of stars, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to be able to hold your own in those sorts of rooms and garner respect all the same. So I've learned a lot in that process. So thank you very, very much. If people want to know more about how to find more about yourself and your work, where can they find you?
The best place is probably on Instagram, to be fair. So it's Alex Le Gue on Instagram. And then, just basically if you go to the Matchroom website, there's bits and pieces on there. But really, you just get in touch with me direct. I'll be able to tell you exactly what's what in terms of the role. And I'm always, that's one thing, I'm always really, really happy to help young people that want to help themselves and want to get involved in the industry. So I'll always answer any questions and help connect people with opportunities.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And don't forget, we've still got part 2 to come, featuring our get to know you questions. So you've already alluded to who's in your phone book, but we've got a special question on that one. So without further ado, that has been Sofa SENSEIS on the akhi&saltfish Digital Network. You've been joined by me, Kieron, and Alex Le Gue from Matchroom Boxing. He is the head of community development, and I'm sure you'll agree, it's been a pleasure talking to him. So if you want to get stuck into more of his journey, make sure you follow him online. And don't forget to follow us at Sofa SENSEIS on Instagram, akhi&saltfish on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, all those fantastic platforms. We're available. If you've got any questions or comments, please do email akhi&saltfish@gmail.com. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star rating and review, and share this with a friend because it really helps us grow. Thank you, take care, and catch you next week.